Recovering from open-heart surgery, my daughter-in-law visited with cheap flowers and fake smiles, pushing papers for a vacation loan while my son was conveniently absent. I knew they were trying to steal my home, so I signed them, a calm smile playing on my lips, knowing their cruel scheme was already doomed. When the truth hits, their faces will be priceless. This is just the beginning of my story. Like, share, and let us know where you are listening from. The world for Eleanor was currently a dull haze of sterile white walls and the incessant beeping of machines. Just 3 days out from open-heart surgery, her body felt like a fragile porcelain doll, each breath a conscious effort, each movement a delicate dance against the pain. Yet beneath the layers of exhaustion and discomfort, her mind remained a fortress, sharp and unyielding. She lay propped against a stack of crisp white pillows, gazing blankly at the impersonal ceiling, when the door creaked open. Seraphina, her daughter-in-law, stepped into the room, a jarring splash of artificial cheer against the quiet solemnity of the hospital ward. Her smile, stretched wide across her face, didn't quite reach her eyes, which darted around the room with an almost nervous energy. In one hand, she clutched a small, cellophane-wrapped bouquet of generic red roses, the kind you pick up at a grocery store on the way to a last-minute visit. They were cheap, certainly, but it was the thought, or rather, the lack thereof, that truly struck Eleanor. "Eleanor, darling, look at you, so bright-eyed," Seraphina trilled, her voice a little too loud for the hushed environment. She placed the wilted flowers on the small bedside table, nudging aside a half-empty glass of water. "I brought you some cheer, though honestly, you look like you're recovering wonderfully." Eleanor offered a faint, tired smile in return, observing Seraphina with an almost clinical detachment. "Thank you, Seraphina. It's thoughtful." She didn't press the issue of Daniel's absence, though his shadow loomed large in the sterile room. Seraphina predictably offered up the pre-rehearsed excuse before Eleanor even had to ask. "Daniel sends his love, of course. He's absolutely swamped with work. You know how it is. A new client, incredibly demanding. He wanted to be here, truly, but responsibilities, darling. Responsibilities." She waved a dismissive hand, as if warding off any potential skepticism. Eleanor merely nodded, a dull ache settling in her chest, not from the surgery, but from the familiar sting of disappointment. Daniel had always been easily swayed, easily manipulated, especially by Seraphina's persuasive charm and his own insatiable desire for an easier path. His work had a convenient way of interfering whenever genuine effort or emotional support was required. Seraphina pulled up at the uncomfortable visitor's chair, fumbling with a large, official-looking envelope she'd been clutching. "Anyway," she began, her tone shifting to one of forced excitement, "I actually came for something else, something wonderful. Daniel and I have been planning this incredible surprise for you." Eleanor watched, her heart giving a slow, steady thump. She knew what was coming. Every fiber of her being screamed it. Seraphina beamed, pulling out a thick stack of papers. "We've been looking at this amazing resort in Hawaii, all-inclusive, pristine beaches, you name it. And we thought, after everything you've been through, you absolutely deserve a luxurious escape. We're just finalizing the financing for it. And there are a few forms here, just standard vacation loan documents, really. Nothing complicated, just signatures to get the ball rolling." Eleanor's eyes, though still and steady, scanned the documents as Seraphina spread them out on the small, movable tray table that served as her dinner surface. The legal jargon jumped out at her, clear as day, despite the fog of painkillers. Loan agreement, indeed. There were sections clearly marked deed of trust, quitclaim deed, and most damningly, general power of attorney. Not just a vacation loan, but a meticulously crafted legal assault on her very home, her independence, her legacy. They weren't financing a vacation. They were financing her eviction. A cold, familiar dread tightened around her, but it was quickly eclipsed by a surge of grim satisfaction. This was exactly what she had anticipated, precisely why she had acted months ago. The memory of that fateful evening 6 months prior played vividly in her mind. She had been recovering from a bad bout of pneumonia, listening from her bedroom, supposedly asleep, as Seraphina's syrupy voice had drifted up from the living room, laced with a chillingly casual cruelty. "The old woman won't last forever, Daniel. And with her health, it could be any day now. We need to secure the house. If she goes into long-term care, that's half our inheritance gone to medical bills. Think about it. We could sell this place, pay off our debts, finally get that luxury car. Daniel's reply had been weak, almost a whine. But Mom, she's still lucid. She'll never agree to sign anything over. That's what power of attorney is for, darling. We just need to convince her it's for her own good, for easier management if she gets worse. Or better yet, for some grand gesture, like a dream vacation. She'll be so grateful she won't even read the fine print. That conversation, overheard from her sickbed, had been a poison arrow to her heart, twisting the love she had for her son into a raw, festering wound. But it had also been a stark, terrifying awakening. The next morning, feigning a miraculous recovery, she had quietly contacted her trusted attorney, Mr. Davies. Over several clandestine meetings and a flurry of legal paperwork, Eleanor had systematically transferred all her assets, her beloved home and her life savings, into an irrevocable trust. A trust designed to protect her and to make her son and daughter-in-law's greed a spectacularly fruitless endeavor. The beneficiaries were carefully stipulated, ensuring her wishes would be carried out, with Daniel and Seraphina conspicuously absent from the primary list. Now, watching Seraphina, Eleanor felt a strange mix of sorrow and vindication. Seraphina pushed a pen into her hand. Just here, and one more on the last page. Oh, and here, a witness signature. She pointed to several lines with a manicured finger, her excitement barely contained. Eleanor took the pen, her hand trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from the immense weight of the moment. She slowly, deliberately signed her name where indicated, each stroke precise. As her signature graced the final document, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. It was a smile filled with a secret knowledge, a quiet triumph that Seraphina, in her blind avarice, was entirely oblivious to. Perfect! Seraphina clapped her hands together, snatching the papers before the ink had barely dried. That's everything. Oh, you'll love Hawaii, Eleanor. We'll make sure of it. She gathered the documents, stuffing them back into the envelope with a triumphant flourish. I really must dash now. Daniel's expecting me with this good news. Don't want to keep him waiting, you know. With a whirlwind of air kisses and another forced smile, Seraphina was gone, leaving behind only the scent of cheap perfume and the faint rustle of the crucial, yet ultimately useless, papers she carried. Eleanor watched the door close, a profound sense of peace washing over her. Seraphina was off to celebrate a victory that was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. Eleanor closed her eyes, the beeping of the machines now fading into the background. The pain of Daniel's betrayal, his willingness to conspire against his own mother, gnawed at her, a wound deeper than any incision the surgeon had made. But with that pain came an undeniable anticipation, a thrill of righteous justice. Monday, that was the day Mr. Davies would set the next phase of her plan in motion. The day her son and daughter-in-law would discover the true nature of the papers she had so calmly signed. She allowed herself to prepare for a moment, a luxurious mental escape, to conjure the image of Seraphina's face when the truth finally dawned. The shock, the disbelief, the utter collapse of her carefully constructed house of cards. It would be a sight to behold, a memory Eleanor would savor for years to come. Eleanor lay in the pristine hospital bed, the soft hum of the machines a constant reminder of her fragile state. Yet her mind was anything but fragile. It drifted back, away from the sterile present, to a time when life was simpler, when love felt unconditional. She found herself asking the same agonizing question repeatedly. When did Daniel change? When did her sweet, earnest boy transform into the man who would conspire to strip her of her home? Her earliest memories of Daniel were bathed in a warm, golden light, filtered through the gentle haze of nostalgia. He was a bright-eyed, curious child, all elbows and knees, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a smile that could melt any frustration. She remembered him, no older than 5, trudging through their small backyard, his tiny fist clutching a bouquet of sun-kissed dandelions. He would present them to her with the solemn gravity of a prince offering jewels to his queen, his face smudged with dirt and joy. For you, Mama, he would declare, his voice a pure, innocent melody. Those yellow weeds, dismissed by others, were treasures to Eleanor, symbols of his unadulterated love, carefully pressed between the pages of her favorite books. He would help her in the garden, mostly by digging holes where none were knotted, or by watering the rose bushes until they were practically drowned, his laughter echoing through the air, a sound she cherished more than any symphony. Their world, though modest, had been full, filled with Arthur, her beloved husband, and their shared dreams. But tragedy, as it often does, struck with a brutal swiftness. Arthur, a man of quiet strength and unwavering kindness, succumbed to a sudden illness when Daniel was just 8 years old. The gaping void he left behind was immense, a silent scream in their small home. Eleanor, then a woman in her late 30s, found herself a widow, tasked with the daunting responsibility of raising their son alone. The weight of grief and newfound obligation pressed down on her, but she refused to crumble. She looked at Daniel's innocent face, still reeling from the incomprehensible loss of his father, and knew she had to be strong. For both of them, survival became her mantra. Eleanor worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, her hands growing calloused, her body aching, but her spirit unbroken. During the day, she was a librarian, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books and the quiet whispers of knowledge. In the evening, she cleaned offices, pushing a vacuum cleaner across endless carpets, her mind often replaying snippets of conversations with Arthur or planning dinner for Daniel. Their small house, the one Arthur had bought for them with his first significant paycheck, became her fortress, a symbol of stability amidst the storm. She pruned the rose bushes Arthur had planted, tended the small vegetable patch, and ensured Daniel always had a warm meal, clean clothes, and a bedtime story. Money was always tight, but love was abundant. Daniel in those years was her anchor, her reason. He seemed to understand the sacrifices she made, offering his help with chores, excelling in school, always bringing home good grades to make her proud. "I'll take care of you, Mom," he had promised earnestly, his young eyes filled with unwavering conviction, echoing his father's words. And for a few precious years, he did. He was a doting son, always attentive, always concerned. He would bring her tea after a long day, listen patiently to her stories, and celebrate her small victories with genuine enthusiasm. He chose a path that seemed destined for success, earning a scholarship to a reputable university where he pursued accounting with a quiet determination. He graduated with honors and swiftly secured a promising position at a respected accounting firm downtown. Eleanor swelled with pride, convinced her sacrifices had borne the sweetest fruit. The first subtle cracks in their idyllic bond began to appear when he met Seraphina. He spoke of her with a giddy excitement Eleanor hadn't heard in years, describing her beauty, her intelligence, her family's wealth. "She's different, Mom," he'd said, a dreamy look in his eyes. "She comes from old money. This could be big for me." Eleanor had a sinking feeling then, a premonition that this different might not be entirely good. When Daniel finally brought Seraphina home to meet her, Eleanor braced herself. Seraphina was undeniably striking, with sharp features, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, and an air of expensive confidence. But her smile, though polite, felt brittle, her eyes cold as they surveyed Eleanor's comfortable but undeniably modest home. The antique sideboard Arthur had refinished, the slightly faded but beloved Persian rug, the walls adorned with family photos, all seemed to fall under Seraphina's critical, assessing gaze. "Oh, it's so quaint," Seraphina had purred, her voice dripping with an almost condescending sweetness as she glanced around the living room. "Such character. Though I imagine it must be a nightmare to keep clean. And that wallpaper, is that still popular?" She gestured dismissively at the floral pattern Eleanor had carefully chosen years ago. "Daniel's told me all about your little oasis here. So cozy." Her tone implied small and outdated. Eleanor had felt a blush creep up her neck, not of shame but of indignation. Daniel, however, seemed utterly enchanted, completely blind to the thinly veiled jabs. He hung on Seraphina's every word, eager to impress her, to prove he was worthy of her attention and her family's perceived prestige. He saw her not just as a love interest, but as his golden ticket, a gateway to a life of luxury and social standing he'd only glimpsed from afar. His own ambition, which Eleanor had always admired, now seemed to twist into something grasping and avaricious under Seraphina's influence. Their wedding was a grand affair, a lavish spectacle of wealth and status, almost entirely orchestrated and paid for by Seraphina's parents. It was held at an exclusive country club, dripping with crystal and white roses, a world away from Eleanor's humble home. Every detail from the engraved invitations to the multi-tiered cake screamed opulence and carefully curated appearances. Eleanor felt like an outsider, a relic from a different time, observing the charade from the sidelines. The memory of Daniel's face that day still stung, a wound that had never truly healed. She had chosen her best dress for the occasion, a soft lavender gown she'd bought for a special anniversary years ago, simple but elegant. As she approached Daniel before the ceremony, her heart swelling with maternal pride, he had looked at her, then his gaze flickered to her dress, and a shadow of embarrassment crossed his features. "Mom," he'd muttered, pulling her aside, his voice low and urgent. "Why didn't you wear something newer? That dress is a bit outdated, don't you think? Seraphina's family is all about presentation." The words, though whispered, had hit her like a physical blow, colder than any winter wind. The dandelions of his childhood seemed a million miles away, replaced by the bitter frost of his new world. After the elaborate wedding, the gilded facade of family unity began to crack, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Daniel's visits, once a comforting routine, became less frequent, relegated to quick, often rushed appearances. His phone calls, once filled with genuine conversations about his day or aspirations, shortened to perfunctory check-ins, often punctuated by Seraphina's impatient whispers in the background. The warmth that had once characterized their relationship began to dissipate, replaced by a growing chill, a palpable distance that Eleanor felt acutely. Seraphina, in the meantime, had perfected the art of the subtle dig. Her comments, seemingly innocuous to an outsider, were carefully aimed arrows designed to chip away at Eleanor's confidence and her sense of belonging in her own home. "This neighborhood has really gone downhill, hasn't it, Eleanor?" she'd remark, her nose crinkling delicately as she surveyed the street from Eleanor's living room window. "So many, well, different kinds of people moving in. I'd be nervous, honestly, all alone here." Or walking through the kitchen, she'd run a perfectly manicured finger along the sturdy oak cabinets Arthur had built with such pride. "These cabinets are so retro. It's almost charming in a kitschy way, but definitely not what you see in modern homes anymore. Wouldn't you just love a sleek, minimalist kitchen, Eleanor? Something with an island, maybe granite countertops?" Each comment was a veiled insult, a constant reminder that Eleanor's world, her cherished home, was not up to Seraphina's exacting, expensive standards. The jabs grew more pointed. Seraphina began to subtly, then not so subtly, suggest retirement communities for Eleanor's situation. "You know, Eleanor, for your age and with your health, it's just so much responsibility, isn't it? This big house, the garden. There are some lovely places, all inclusive with activities and no stairs to worry about. Daniel and I just want you to be comfortable, safe. It would be so much less for you to worry about." The implication was clear. Eleanor was a burden, her home a problem, and her independent life an inconvenience. What stung Eleanor most was Daniel's silence. He never once defended her, never once countered Seraphina's condescending remarks. Instead, over time, he started to echo his wife's sentiments, albeit in a softer, more hesitant tone. "Mom, maybe Seraphina has a point about the house," he'd say, avoiding her gaze. "It's a lot to maintain. We just want what's best for you." The words were almost identical to Seraphina's, proof that her venom had seeped into him, eroding his own sense of loyalty. The son who had once brought her dandelions and sworn to protect her was gone, replaced by a shadow of a man seemingly unable to form an opinion independent of his wife's. 3 years into their marriage, Daniel and Seraphina's lavish lifestyle began to catch up with them. Despite their high-paying jobs, their spending habits were astronomical. Designer clothes, expensive cars, frequent trips, gourmet meals out. They lived well beyond their means. Eleanor would hear snippets of their financial woes during their brief visits, always accompanied by vague complaints about unexpected expenses or market fluctuations. One afternoon, Daniel called, his voice strained and apologetic. Mom, we're in a bit of a bind, just a temporary thing, you know how it is. Seraphina and I need a little help. We're looking at a short-term loan just to tide us over for a few months until my bonus comes through. Could you possibly lend us $30,000? We'll pay you back, with interest, within 6 months, absolute guarantee. Eleanor, still holding on to a glimmer of the devoted son she once knew, and worried about their stability, agreed. She had worked hard for her modest savings, putting away every spare cent for her golden years, for unexpected emergencies. $30,000 was a significant chunk of it, but it was for Daniel, for her son. She transferred the money, her heart heavy but hopeful that this act of generosity would somehow rekindle the warmth that had vanished. 6 months came and went, then a year. The temporary loan was never repaid. The subject was skillfully sidestepped whenever she tried to broach it, met with vague promises or outright deflection. The unspoken understanding was that the money was simply gone, absorbed into their insatiable need for luxury. The arrival of her grandchildren, Leo and his twin sister, brought a momentary surge of joy, a fleeting hope that perhaps, through them, the family bond could be repaired. But even that was tainted by Seraphina's suffocating possessiveness and bizarre anxieties. Leo and his sister rarely visited Eleanor's house. When they did, Seraphina would hover like a hawk, her eyes constantly scanning for perceived dangers. "Oh, Eleanor, do you mind if Leo doesn't play with that old teddy bear? I'm not sure about the dust mites, and please, no sugar. We're very strict about their diet." She'd bring her own approved snacks, her own sanitized toys, as if Eleanor's home was a biohazard zone, her grandmotherly love a vector for contamination. Eleanor would watch Seraphina, a cold, calculating woman whose primary concern seemed to be appearances and material gain, even at the expense of family connection. The children, delightful as they were, seemed to be extensions of their parents' curated image, always impeccably dressed, always on a tight schedule, rarely allowed the freedom to simply be children in their grandmother's care. The distance between them grew wider with each passing year, each unspoken slight. Despite their constant financial strain, Daniel and Seraphina always presented a facade of prosperity. New cars would appear in their driveway, followed by complaints about the payments. They'd brag about their latest exotic vacation, then lament the credit card bills. It was a vicious cycle of aspiration and debt, fueled by a relentless need to keep up appearances, a lifestyle Eleanor knew they couldn't truly afford. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet, insistent voice whispered that eventually they would come looking for more. Her home, her final asset, was undoubtedly next on their list. The turning point, the moment the fragile facade of Eleanor's world finally shattered, arrived subtly, insidiously, on an ordinary Tuesday evening. She had been feeling unwell, a lingering cough from what she thought was a persistent cold, and had retired to her bedroom early, leaving the television softly playing in the living room for Daniel and Seraphina, who were visiting. She thought she had drifted off to sleep, only to be jolted awake by the low murmur of voices drifting up the stairs. It was Seraphina's voice, sharp and clear, cutting through the thin walls. "Honestly, Daniel, how much longer do you think she can realistically live alone in that house? I mean, she's almost 70, and she's always not feeling well lately. This place is a gold mine. Have you looked at the property values in this area? It's gone up astronomically. We could get a fortune for it." Eleanor held her breath, her heart beginning a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She waited desperately for Daniel to defend her, to express outrage, to remind his wife of all Eleanor had sacrificed for him. Instead, there was a pause, a hesitant clearing of the throat, and then Daniel's voice, lower, conspiratorial. "I know, Seraphina. I've thought about it. But Mom's stubborn. She'd never willingly sign anything over." "Then we make her," Seraphina countered, her voice hardening. "Or we find a way. We should talk to a lawyer, someone who specializes in elder care, maybe, or estate planning, someone who can advise us on options, like, say, obtaining power of attorney if she becomes less capable." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. "It's for her own good, Daniel. to make sure her assets are managed properly. We'd just be doing our duty as her loving children. Eleanor felt a cold dread seep into her bones, chilling her far more profoundly than any physical ailment. This wasn't just greed, it was a calculated, callous plot. Her own son, the boy who had brought her dandelions, was discussing how to strip her of her independence, her home, her dignity. The betrayal cut deeper than any surgeon's scalpel, leaving her heartbroken, gut-punched, and utterly, devastatingly alone. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. The next morning, Eleanor woke with a resolve harder than steel. The hurt was still a raw wound, but it was now overlaid with a fierce determination. She wouldn't be a victim. She would fight back. With a steady hand, she dialed a familiar number. "Clara, it's Eleanor. I need to see you, urgently." Clara Jenkins was more than just Eleanor's lawyer. She was a trusted friend from high school, a woman of sharp intellect and unwavering integrity. Clara had been a beacon of support after Arthur's death, and her legal advice had always been sound and honest. Meeting in Clara's discreet office, Eleanor recounted the conversation she had overheard, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. Clara listened patiently, her expression growing increasingly grim. When Eleanor finished, Clara leaned back in her chair, her gaze empathetic yet resolute. "Eleanor, what they're planning is despicable, but not uncommon. Thankfully, you have come to me before they've made any actual moves. We can protect you. We can make sure they can't touch a single thing." Clara then outlined a comprehensive plan, explaining each step with clarity and reassurance. "First," she began, "we're going to establish an irrevocable trust for your house. This means the deed to your home will be transferred into the trust. Once it's in the trust, it's no longer legally yours in the traditional sense, and therefore it's completely out of their reach. You'll still live there, maintain it, but legally it becomes untouchable by them, even if they somehow manage to get a power of attorney." Eleanor listened, a glimmer of hope rekindling within her. "And my savings? My pension?" "We'll address that too," Claire affirmed. "You mentioned you have some joint accounts with Daniel. We'll close those immediately. Any funds remaining there will be moved into new accounts, solely in your name, with no one else having access. We'll set up clear beneficiaries for your pension and any remaining investments, ensuring your wishes are followed, and again, out of their control." The process took several weeks, a meticulous dance of paperwork and legalities. Eleanor signed document after document, each stroke of her pen severing another link to her son's potential grasp. Clara's final words of assurance were a balm to Eleanor's wounded spirit. "Once these documents are filed, Eleanor, your assets are protected. If they try to get you to sign anything later, property deeds, power of attorney, those signatures will be legally invalid. You won't own the house anymore in a way that allows them to sell it or mortgage it. The trust owns it, and it operates by its own rules, which we've carefully crafted to protect you." Armed with this knowledge, Eleanor resumed her life, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. She continued to endure Seraphina's subtle digs about her home, her health, her need for help. She parried Daniel's increasingly transparent questions about her finances, offering vague answers that satisfied their superficial curiosity without revealing anything. Her outward demeanor remained calm, polite, even a little frail, playing perfectly into the narrative they had constructed for her. But beneath the surface, a quiet strength simmered. She watched them, observed their growing desperation, their thinly veiled attempts to pry, and knew that her secret plan was secure. The trap had been set, the bait taken, and the unsuspecting predators were about to find themselves ensnared by their own greed. The waiting was the hardest part, but Eleanor was a patient woman. "The story isn't over yet, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next." If you're gripped by Eleanor's journey, remember to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss a single part of her powerful stand. Let's see how her confrontation unfolds. The hospital discharged Eleanor on Friday afternoon. She politely but firmly declined Daniel and Seraphina's offer to pick her up, explaining she had already arranged for her kind neighbor Brenda to help her get home and settle in. Brenda, a cheerful woman who had lived next door for decades, was a far more comforting presence than her own kin. As Brenda's car pulled away from the sterile hospital entrance, Eleanor looked back, a silent farewell to the place where her carefully orchestrated plan had been set in motion. The weekend passed in a blur of quiet recovery and steel-nerved anticipation. Eleanor spent the hours mentally rehearsing the upcoming confrontation, fortifying herself for the emotional battle she knew was inevitable. Her body was still healing, but her spirit was ready. Monday morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill, but inside Eleanor's home, the air was thick with unspoken tension. She sat in her favorite armchair in the living room, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands, pretending to read a book. Her gaze, however, kept drifting to the front door. A familiar click and the soft scrape of a key in the lock announced their arrival. Daniel and Seraphina entered, not bothering to knock, a silent testament to their assumed ownership. Seraphina, dressed impeccably as always, in a sharp tailored suit and designer heels that clicked imperiously on Eleanor's hardwood floors, looked as if she were about to attend a fashion show rather than visit her recovering mother-in-law. Her eyes, however, held a predatory glint. "Morning, Eleanor," Seraphina chirped, her smile a little too triumphant. She clutched the infamous envelope, the one containing the vacation loan papers, to her chest like a precious trophy. "I'm just going to pop down to the bank and get these finalized. Daniel will stay with you." Without another word, she turned on her heel and swept out of the house, leaving a faint trail of expensive perfume in her wake. Daniel shuffled into the living room, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. He looked uncomfortable, his shoulders hunched. "Morning, Mom. How are you feeling?" His voice was hesitant, lacking the usual false cheer. "Better, thank you, Daniel," Eleanor replied, her voice calm and steady, giving nothing away. She took a sip of her tea. He attempted a few minutes of awkward small talk, asking about her appetite and sleep, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. Soon enough, he circled back to their familiar theme. "Mom, about the house. Seraphina and I have been thinking. It's just so much for you, isn't it? With your recovery, maybe it's time to seriously consider downsizing. A smaller place, less upkeep, something more manageable." Eleanor simply watched him, her expression unreadable. She knew he was trying to soften her up, to lay the groundwork for their perceived victory. Suddenly, the front door burst open with a resounding bang that rattled the windows. Seraphina stood there, her perfectly coiffed hair slightly askew, her face a mask of incandescent fury. Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, blazed with pure rage. The envelope of papers, now crumpled, was clutched in her trembling hand. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the quiet house. "What kind of game are you playing, you manipulative old woman?" Eleanor slowly, deliberately placed her teacup on the side table. Her gaze was unflinching as she met Seraphina's furious stare. "I'm not playing any game, Seraphina. I simply protected myself." "The bank said these papers are worthless," Seraphina screamed, waving the crumpled documents. "They said the house isn't even in your name anymore. What did you do with it?" "The house," Eleanor stated calmly, "was transferred into an irrevocable trust several months ago. It is no longer mine to give away, sell, or sign over. Those papers you have there, the ones you so gleefully tricked me into signing, are completely, utterly useless." Seraphina's mouth hung open, her face draining of color. Daniel, who had been sitting frozen, now looked from his wife to his mother, a growing horror dawning in his eyes. You tricked us," Seraphina sputtered, her voice rising in pitch. "You played us for fools." "I merely protected what was rightfully mine," Eleanor corrected, her voice still quiet but firm. "Something your greed attempted to steal." A new wave of fury washed over Seraphina. But the power of attorney, the accounts, we were going to manage everything for you." "Oh yes, the accounts," Eleanor said, a hint of steel entering her tone. "I'm afraid those joint accounts you were so keen on managing have also been closed. All funds transferred to new private accounts. You won't find anything there to manage either." Daniel let out a small, strangled gasp. He buried his face in his hands. Eleanor turned her gaze directly to her son, her eyes filled with a profound sorrow that cut through Seraphina's rage. "And as for the power of attorney, Daniel," she continued, her voice low and steady, "I heard you, you know. I heard you and Seraphina discussing how you were going to talk to a lawyer about options to gain power of attorney, how you were going to get me declared less capable so you could finally get your hands on this house. I heard every word. Daniel flinched as if struck. He looked up, his face pale and contorted with guilt and shame. Mom, I didn't. His voice trailed off, unable to form a coherent denial. Seraphina's mouth completely dissolved. Her face, contorted with avarice, was ugly and venomous. This is outrageous. You're old, you're sick, you're wasting this house. It's too big for you. It's a huge asset that's just sitting here doing nothing while we're struggling. Struggling? Eleanor scoffed, a dry, bitter laugh escaping her lips. Is that what you call your lavish vacations, your expensive cars, your designer clothes? The $30,000 you borrowed from my meager savings and never repaid? You've been living a fantasy life, funded by your insatiable greed, and you thought my home would be your next victim. Seraphina's jaw tightened. We'll see about this. My family has lawyers. We'll fight this. This trust, it can't be legal. It is perfectly legal, Seraphina, Eleanor said, her voice chillingly calm. And it is irrevocable. You're welcome to involve your lawyers. Mine, Clara Jenkins, is quite excellent. I'm sure she'd be delighted to explain the intricacies of elder abuse protection laws to your legal team. Seraphina stared at her, her eyes narrowed slits of fury, but for the first time, Eleanor saw a flicker of doubt, perhaps even fear in their depths. She knew she had won this round. Seraphina grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him to his feet. Come on, Daniel, get out of this house. We're not going to stand here and be insulted. She practically dragged him towards the door, Daniel's head bowed in profound shame. As the door slammed shut, Eleanor was left alone in the quiet living room. The adrenaline slowly receded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. She had protected her home, her legacy, her independence. But looking at the empty space where Daniel had stood, a deep, aching sadness settled in her heart. She had won the battle, but she had irrevocably lost her son. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was a silence so profound it was almost deafening. For a week, Eleanor heard nothing from Daniel or Seraphina. It was a reprieve, a calm before the inevitable storm. Then a thick envelope arrived, bearing the letterhead of a prominent law firm. Inside, a formal letter from a Ms. Victoria Stone, representing Daniel and Seraphina, informed Eleanor of their intent to petition the court for a competency hearing, citing Eleanor's diminished capacity due to her recent surgery and advancing age. Eleanor felt a familiar surge of indignation, quickly followed by a quiet resolve. She immediately forwarded the letter to Clara. Clara, ever the professional, was unimpressed. Eleanor, don't give this a second thought. We anticipated this. You have a full bill of health from your cardiologist, a glowing assessment from your surgeon, and your cognitive function was thoroughly evaluated by a neurologist just last month. Not to mention the extensive legal documentation proving your sound mind when you set up the trust. This is a desperate, baseless move. Clara then drafted a meticulously detailed response, attaching every piece of medical and legal documentation that affirmed Eleanor's sharp intellect and perfectly sound judgment. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived from Victoria Stone. This one far less aggressive. After reviewing Eleanor's evidence, Miss Stone had withdrawn the petition. It was a small, satisfying victory, a confirmation that her preparations had been thorough. While the legal threats receded, another form of pressure began to mount. The phone call started, a slow drip of well-meaning but ultimately damaging interference. Relatives, distant cousins, even Arthur's older sister, Agnes, called Eleanor, their voices laced with concern, confusion, and subtle judgment. Eleanor, darling, I heard Daniel is just heartbroken. He says you've completely cut him off, turned against him. Is it true you're trying to disinherit him? Agnes's voice, usually so kind, now held a bewildered edge. He just sounds so lost. Eleanor explained calmly at first, then with growing weariness, that Daniel's story was a fabrication, that she was merely protecting herself from their greedy machinations. But Daniel's version, the distraught son wronged by his ailing mother, seemed to spread faster, more convincingly. She found herself feeling increasingly isolated, a pariah in her own extended family. Brenda, her loyal neighbor, became a lifeline. She'd bring over fresh-baked cookies, sit with Eleanor on the porch, and listen without judgment. "Don't you dare let them get to you, Eleanor," Brenda would say, her eyes firm. "You know the truth. And anyone who truly knows you will know it too. Don't you retreat into yourself. You fought for what's yours, and you have every right to it." Weeks turned into a month. Eleanor was out for a walk one crisp afternoon when she ran into Susan Miller, a mutual acquaintance who was notorious for her prolific gossip network. Susan approached, her eyes wide with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. "Eleanor, have you heard? Daniel and Seraphina are in dire straits. Apparently, Seraphina quit her job a few weeks ago, just walked out, saying she was too good for it, expecting a big payout from, well, and now I hear their credit card debt is astronomical, and they've missed several mortgage payments." Eleanor listened, a knot forming in her stomach. It was a vindication, yes, but also a stark reminder of the destructive path they had chosen. A few days later, Eleanor saw a notification on her answering machine, a new voicemail from Daniel. She listened, her heart doing a strange flutter. His voice was strained, devoid of its usual forced cheer. "Mom, it's Daniel. Look, I know things are complicated, but I need to talk to you. Not about anything to do with, just, can we talk? Please?" The desperation in his voice was palpable. Eleanor listened to it twice, her finger hovering over the phone, fighting the powerful urge to call him back, to bridge the chasm. But the memory of his betrayal, of Seraphina's callous words, held her back. She didn't call. Then, a few days after that, a handwritten letter arrived. It was from Daniel, a rarity in this age of digital communication. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, almost childlike. "Dear Mom," it began, "I know I messed up. I truly regret what happened. I'm not asking for money or for the house. I don't know what to do. My life is falling apart. Seraphina, she's changed. I need your advice, Mom. I need your guidance." Eleanor reread the letter several times, a flicker of something akin to hope, or perhaps just a deeper sorrow stirring within her. It wasn't about money, he said, but could she trust it? She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer, a silent promise to consider his plea, but with extreme caution. One morning, as Eleanor sat drinking her coffee, she saw a car slowly drive past her house, then circle the block, before pausing briefly a few houses down. It was Daniel's car. He sat there for a long moment, staring at her home, before slowly driving away, his shoulders slumped. Later that day, Brenda stopped by, her eyes wide with fresh news. "Eleanor, you won't believe it. I just heard from Susan Miller. Daniel's moved out of his house, and apparently Seraphina's place is in foreclosure. It's a disaster." Eleanor merely nodded, a deep, aching sadness settling over her. The vindication she had felt earlier had curdled into a bitter sorrow. The boy who had brought her dandelions, who had promised to take care of her, had lost his way. And though she had protected her home, she couldn't protect him from the consequences of his own choices or from the destructive influence of his wife. The battle was won, but the pieces, in a way, felt immeasurable. Autumn settled over Eleanor's neighborhood, painting the trees in vibrant hues of gold and crimson. 3 months had passed since the intense confrontation with Daniel and Seraphina, 3 months since Eleanor had laid bare their deceit and protected her home. The legal threats had vanished, the family whispers had softened into distant echoes, and life had begun to settle into a new, quieter rhythm. One crisp morning, Brenda bustled over, a newspaper clutched in her hand. "Eleanor, look at this," she said, pointing to a small listing in the real estate section. "Their house, foreclosed. It's official." Eleanor gazed at the grainy photograph of the once impeccable home, now marked by the cold stamp of financial ruin. She felt no triumph, only a quiet melancholy. The rumors had been confirmed. Seraphina, too proud to face the consequences, had retreated to the refuge of her wealthy parents' estate, her dreams of grandeur now a distant, bitter memory. Daniel, stripped of his wife's influence and his accustomed luxuries, was said to be staying at a Holiday Inn on the outskirts of town, his world completely upended. Eleanor spent many evenings by the fireplace reflecting on her feelings for Daniel. The maternal bond, a deep, ancient thread, still lingered, a stubborn ember in her heart. But it was tempered now by the sharp edge of betrayal, by the knowledge of what he had been willing to do. Could she ever truly forgive him? Could he ever truly change? She knew she couldn't initiate contact. Her stance had to remain firm. If he genuinely wanted to make amends, to acknowledge his wrongs, he would have to come to her. The door wouldn't be locked, but it wouldn't be flung wide open without effort on his part. 2 weeks later, as dusk settled and the first stars began to prick the evening sky, a tentative knock sounded at her front door. Eleanor's heart gave a little jolt. She knew instinctively who it was. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Daniel stood on her porch, a shadow of the man he once was. His usually neat hair was disheveled, dark circles sagged beneath his tired eyes, and his clothes, though clean, seemed to hang loosely on his frame. He looked thin, unkempt, and utterly defeated. The arrogant spark that Seraphina had ignited in him was completely extinguished. "Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse, his gaze flickering uncertainly. Eleanor stepped aside, a silent invitation. He walked in, his shoulders slumped, and stood awkwardly in the center of the living room, the familiar space suddenly seeming vast and unfamiliar to him. Eleanor simply watched him, noting the stark contrast between this humbled man and the polished, ambitious son who had stood before her a year ago. She led him to the kitchen, where she brewed a fresh pot of tea. As they sat across from each other at the small table, the aroma of chamomile filling the air, Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't even know where to begin." He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate apology. Not just for the papers, or for trying to take the house, but for who I became, for letting Seraphina turn me into someone I barely recognize. He confessed everything. How Seraphina had left him immediately after the foreclosure, blaming him entirely for their financial ruin. How he had lost his job at the accounting firm shortly after. His reputation tarnished, his focus shattered. "I got caught up, Mom," he choked out, tears finally welling in his eyes. "I wanted more, always more, and nothing was ever enough. I knew what we were doing was wrong, with the house, with the accounts, but it was easier to just go along with Seraphina, easier than standing up to her, easier than admitting I was wrong. I thought I was making a better life for myself, but I lost myself." Eleanor listened, her own eyes softening slightly. The genuine remorse in his voice was undeniable. He wasn't blaming Seraphina entirely. He was taking responsibility. It was the first true acknowledgement of his actions she had heard in years. After a long silence, Eleanor spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "Daniel, I can't undo what happened, and trust once broken is very hard to rebuild. But you are still my son, and I can see that you are truly suffering." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I'm willing to offer you a temporary place to stay. I have the guest room. It's empty. For 2 months, no rent, but on very strict conditions." Daniel looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Anything, Mom, anything." "First," Eleanor continued, holding his gaze, "you will help around the house. The garden needs tending. The gutters need cleaning. You will actively seek work, any work, to get yourself back on your feet. And most importantly, there will be no talk of my finances, no attempts at manipulation, no excuses. This is a chance for you to prove that the boy who brought me dandelions is still somewhere inside." Daniel was stunned, relief washing over his face. "Mom, thank you. Thank you." He stood up, awkwardly reaching out, then pulling his hand back. "I won't let you down again." 6 months later, on Eleanor's 71st birthday, her house was filled with warmth and laughter. It wasn't the lavish, empty spectacle of Daniel's wedding, but a gathering of genuine affection. Brenda was there, sharing stories and jokes. Clara, her steadfast lawyer and friend, was raising a glass of sparkling cider. And in the center of it all, a much healthier, clearer-eyed Daniel, now working at a local accounting firm, having found his own small apartment. He visited twice a week, quietly helping Eleanor with chores, listening more than he spoke, a thoughtful, humbled man beginning to find his way back. As Daniel brought out a homemade chocolate cake, Eleanor looked around the room, her heart swelling with a quiet contentment. As everyone sang happy birthday, she closed her eyes. There was no grand wish to be made, no desperate hope to cling to. Everything she truly needed, a safe, beloved home, a son finding his path to redemption, and her own unwavering strength, was already present, a testament to her resilience and the enduring power of a mother's love, even when tested to its very limits.